which teams have the best fixtures and which teams have the best underlying data for FPL. Let's go take a look. Disclaimer, I am not an expert, this is just my opinion. Guys, what we're going to do today is we're going to look at the defensive numbers for all the teams in the Premier League, aside from the newly promoted ones, because using their data in the Championship would be quite unreliable. All we know about those guys is that Hull are probably going to have the worst season of all time. Then we're going to look at the attacking numbers of each team, and then we're going to use that data to rank how hard each team is as a fixture and look at the general fixture difficulty rating chart to see which teams you should target in game week 1 for your FPL teams. I'm also going to take into consideration each team's transfer window, even though we've not seen a lot yet. Some teams have been picked apart a bit and some teams have strengthened. First off, looking at the defensive data, we have Arsenal, and oh my god, right? I know Saliba is out, guys. It's a bad thing. Saliba is great for the Arsenal defence, he is. But those defensive numbers are genuinely ridiculous. Even though the Arsenal defence is going to get a little worse, they are still by far the best defence in the league. It's unreal, in my opinion. You can't go without them. City are second for, expected clean sheets. Expected goals conceded wise, they aren't great, but they're still pretty good compared to most teams in the league, which is why I put them second. Then we have Liverpool, who on paper weren't great defensively last season if you were looking on the surface, but the underlying data does tell a different story. Behind them, we have Manchester United, very similar data. The clean sheets weren't there for them, but the underlying data is good. And something surprising is Brighton being in 5th. Brighton are quite underrated defensively, especially by FPL Towers, because for some reason, they priced Verbruggen at 4.5 million, even though he plays for a defence which is arguably top 5 in the league. Don't get me wrong, they lost Van Heck. He was a reliable asset to their team. But they haven't lost many other defenders. They're a well-run club, they've got a good manager. Their defence should still be okay, so having a keeper from that team costing 4.5 million, I believe was a mistake, and I will definitely be owning him. Palace are in 6th, they were an okay defence, but Glasner is now gone, they could get a little worse. And I'm unsure how to feel about whether Chelsea will improve that much, because some of their signings are good, some of them are genuinely awful. It's hard to tell with those guys. Then we have Newcastle and Spurs in the middle. Newcastle, based on their transfer window, could get worse if I'm being honest, whereas Spurs could get better, even though their last 2 seasons were quite bad. They've signed a lot of good players. They've got Senesi, Van Heck, Tonali, Matheus Fernandes. I don't know how they can afford all this after finishing 17th, but somehow they can. Maybe some dodgy dealings going on, but, it's not my business. I don't care. I'm only talking about FPL. I'm not trying to get all political. Fulham are pretty boring, basic, and average. They're the same pretty much every year. Sunderland are not great. Defensively, they're mid-table, just below mid-table. When you look at their attacking data, you will see how mediocre or below mediocre they are. Brentford are in 13th. I'm surprised to see them this low. I thought they were okay defensively last season, but obviously not. Below them, we have Aston Villa. Now, Aston Villa are a hard one, okay? They finished 4th, 6th, and 4th in the last 3 Premier League seasons. 3 good finishes, but their data last season wasn't good. It doesn't get much better when looking at their attacking data. So technically speaking, I should make them a fairly easier fixture, but because of how consistent they are, it's hard to do that because they're always a tough match, especially playing away to Aston Villa. It's never easy. Their home defence is normally okay, but it's the away defence that really lets them down. After that, we have Bournemouth. And out of every single team that stayed up in the Premier League last season, Bournemouth are last for expected goals conceded. They're not doing well at all. Their defence is quite overrated, in my opinion, especially after losing Senesi. They're going to get even worse, I think. They're not a bad club, are they? They've lost their manager as well, though. That's the issue. Looking at some of their defenders like Truffert, he could still be good because he plays so far forward. But after losing some, key players, Senesi, and their manager, they may get even worse defensively, meaning they could be a defence to avoid. Then we have Everton. Guys, Everton are quite overrated defensively. There was lots of people owning Everton defenders last season. Their defensive data was not good at all. And they may find themselves in another relegation battle this season, depending on how the newly promoted teams do, because their attacking data isn't that great, Everton. Their team, they play all right, and some of their assets, you know what you're going to get. I'm a big fan of Boosbury Hall and Tarkowski, But generally speaking, they're an easy team to target. You know, you'd want your players playing against Everton. And just below them, we have Nottingham Forest, and I think they will get a lot stronger because Glasner is now at Forest, which surprises me. I thought he would have gone to a slightly better club, but Forest will be very lucky to have him. We're looking at the attacking numbers now. These three clubs at the top are quite a way above the rest of the teams in the league. Man City obviously top this chart. It will be interesting to see how they do under Maresca. And even though Arsenal are known for how good they are defensively, they still generate a strong amount of expected goals. Whether that's, you know, coming from open play or set pieces, it's mainly coming from set pieces, which is why their attacking assets aren't great to target, especially because there's a lot of rotation risk too. It's normally better to just go for the defenders. And Man United are a great attack, especially with Bruno playing as the number 10. The issue is with targeting the attackers. Outside of Mbermo, you don't really have many players that are going to be reliable for minutes up there. And Liverpool, they had a bit of a weird season, to be honest. I'd expect their data to improve. Iriola is an interesting managerial choice. Yeah, he did well at Bournemouth, but can he do just as well trying to manage a team that wants to win the league in the Champions League and constantly finish in the top 3? I'm not too sure, but I do think he's a better manager than Arne Slot, if I'm being completely honest. Chelsea are surprisingly top 5 despite their poor season. Some Chelsea attackers look really good to target, but the issue is they play away to Arsenal in game week 3. I'm thinking of possibly targeting a lot of Man United players from game week 1 to 3 and then wildcarding in game week 4. Even though I don't like an early wildcard, I usually try to save it until game week 19, the last possible game week. But an early wildcard looks good here because as soon as Chelsea play away to Arsenal in game week 3, they then head into game week 4 where their fixture run looks really good, and I may want to target Chelsea attackers there because Rodgers and now Pedro are only 7.5 million. I think that is an absolute bargain. Bournemouth in 6th place as expected, not too surprised there. Brentford also had a good attack last season. We know that because Thiago scored so many goals, but they did underperform the expected goals by quite a bit, and we can mainly blame Kevin Schade for that. Only him, despite his hat-trick for me halfway through the season, his finishing was not good. He squandered a lot of big chances. Newcastle, in my opinion, could be an attack to avoid for now. Osula and Johan Wissa aren't too expensive, and they're the two strikers at Newcastle. Voltemada now sort of plays a midfield role. So if we can figure out who's nailed on out of Osula and Wissa, one of those guys could be quite good to target early on in the season because their fixtures aren't awful. I think Osula is the favourite. Well, he was in the last 5 games of the season last year, but, or not last year, last season. But Wissa is, generally speaking, a more renowned striker, so I'm not too sure what's going on there. Brighton aren't so bad. They look like they've got a good attack, well, mid-table, mediocre attack and underlying data, but there's poor finishing up there. They underperform the expected goals, and there is so much rotation. Last season, anytime an attacker had a poor couple game weeks, they were gone. They were on the bench and someone else would come in. You just can't really pick players from that team. I really like Diego Gomez. He's very cheap, and he scored a lot of goals when he was actually playing for Brighton. His per 90 underlying data was strong, but you just can't go there because their fixtures aren't good. We'll look at it later on in the video, and there is rotation there. Despite how cheap he is, I just don't think it's worth it. Then we have Aston Villa, again, not too high. They're mid-table, they're 10th in the attacking data, which isn't awful, but it's also not good. Like defensive numbers, they were 14th, attacking numbers, they're 10th. Generally speaking, away to Aston Villa shouldn't be a red fixture. But like I said, because they're so consistent, I find it hard to not put away to Aston Villa as a red fixture. Once again, we'll talk more about it when I actually show the fixture chart. Right now, though, it's hard to think about where Aston Villa are going to be because, yes, they lost Morgan Rogers, but they signed Garnacho, you know. Garnacho is basically the next Mbappe. I just realised I accidentally missed out Leeds talking about the defensive data. At least I think I did. Leeds look like they're going to finish higher than they did last season. They're mid-table in both metrics, attacking and defensively, which surprises me because they didn't do too well, but they conceded a little more than they should have, and they didn't, you know, score as much as they should have either because Dominic Calvert-Lewin is their striker. I mean, I don't know what else they expected when they brought Calvert-Lewin in as their starting striker. He's known to not always finish his big chances, but that purple patch earlier on last season was insane. He was scoring brace after brace after brace against the biggest teams in the league. I don't know how he did it, but he just kept consistently pulling through. Maybe he'll do that again this season. I doubt it because I don't think he's that great. But Leeds, generally speaking, aren't a bad team. We then have Palace, who are the biggest XG underperformers. Mateta and Sarr are the main culprits. They've been doing it for a couple years now. They get the big chances. Glasner was setting them up to succeed, and they just kept missing and missing. Jeremy Pino was also guilty of this too. Going to the bottom four now, we have Forest. They could improve once again. Glasner is a great manager. We then have Everton, who are also very low in this metric. Could they find themselves in another relegation battle? Who knows? I doubt it, because Coventry and Ipswich probably aren't going to be that good, and you don't need me to tell you how bad Hull City are going to be. Below those two, we have Fulham. Fulham, despite Harry Wilson doing quite well as an attacker, have quite bad attacking numbers. They look like they're on the decline. They're rarely ever improving. At the very least, they're just the same every single season. Wouldn't touch the Fulham attackers. But Sunderland, oh my God, you wouldn't think this. They finished mid-table. They had an okay season. But their data shows, on average, if you look at the attacking data and the defensive data, they're one of the worst teams in the league. And it will be interesting to see how they do next season if they don't sign many big players. When they got promoted last season, they signed a lot of players, so it's no surprise they managed to hold their own. But this season, if they don't improve much more, they could find themselves maybe in a relegation battle. I'm not going to try jinx them, I wouldn't want to do that to you Sunderland fans out there, if there's any Sunderland fans watching. But yeah, they could be in danger. Now we get into the actual fixture difficulty rating chart. It looks different to some I've seen. Like I said, this is based off the data and my opinion is based off the data, so I think it's quite accurate. The newly promoted teams are dark green fixtures. Well, home to Coventry and home to Ipswich are dark green, fixture difficulty rating of 1, whereas Hull, home and away, is fixture difficulty rating 1, because I genuinely think they're going to be awful. I've already said that. And I'm also giving more value to the earlier fixtures, as you should, because game week 1 is not as valuable as game week 5. You don't want to target someone who's playing against Hull in game week 5. You want to target someone who's playing against Hull in game week 1 or 2. You know what I'm saying? So the further on the fixtures get, the more they decline in importance, shall we say. Now, there's two teams here I'm unsure of. Like I've said about Aston Villa already. Home to Aston Villa, I've given a grey fixture. Away to Aston Villa, I've given a red fixture, purely because I feel like they'll still manage to be a really strong team this season. The data disagrees with me. I was tempted to change it around a little bit, but as of right now, I can't bring myself to do it. After a few games, we could see that Aston Villa FDR change a bit. The fixture difficulty rating could be green for when you play against them at home and grey when you play them away. But for now, I'm keeping it as it is. Spurs have also been quite bad, guys. They were very bad last season. Their data is only okay. It's quite bad, to be honest, for a Big Six club. But they've signed a lot of players. I've mentioned this already. They've signed some big names, and I believe they will improve. But it's one of those situations where I'll believe it when I see it, because some big signings, especially in the Premier League, turn out to be duds and bad players. So we'll have to see with that one. Right now, I'm going to leave everything as it is. But after a few game weeks, you definitely could see it change, because there's always some surprises here and there. We'll start at the bottom. No one was going to pick Coventry players anyway. Bournemouth don't have the worst fixture run, but their entry point is quite tough. Very similar to last season, actually. They played away to Liverpool last season, and after that Liverpool game, they had a really good fixture run. This time, though, I wouldn't go there, because they've lost Semenyo, they've lost some good players, they've lost their manager. It just seems like a team you should avoid. And Hull, obviously, maybe you could own some 4 million defenders from their club, because all their defenders cost 4 million. And I think that's a fair price for all of them. Above them, we have Crystal Palace, who, once again, I wouldn't touch. I don't even know who their new manager is, but that club seems to be a bit of a mess at the moment, and I wouldn't go there. Brighton, I don't mind, but the fixtures aren't great to begin with either. It just seems like a team you're better off staying away from, because their assets don't tend to be that great anyway. Ipswich have a decent entry point, but I don't see why any of you would go for Ipswich players. When you get to Chelsea, that's when you can think, yeah, maybe I'll pick players from these teams, but any team below Chelsea, I wouldn't pick players from. Chelsea are only really this low down because they have away to Arsenal in game week 3. If you're picking a Chelsea attacker, but you've got some cover in mind for game week 3, then Chelsea players are really good to own, because apart from that fixture, their games don't look so bad. I mean, away to Fulham and away to Brentford isn't that easy, but game week 2 and game week 4 are the main reason you would have players from Chelsea. I've seen some drafts with 2 or 3 Chelsea attackers. I'm not a big fan of that, to be honest, guys. I don't mind bringing in Chelsea players after game week 3 and game week 4, like I mentioned earlier, but right now I wouldn't be eager to bring their players in. Aston Villa have a lot of uncertainty at the moment. I wouldn't go there. I do like Ollie Watkins as a player, but the fixtures aren't good enough for me. We then have Forest, who aren't very high on the fixture difficulty rating chart. Their fixtures are either very good or very bad. You don't have a grey one there. And I think you guys should be pairing a Forest player with a Spurs player. Their fixture rotation is perfect. Looking at someone like Nico Williams, for example, who looks to be Glasner's new Munoz at Nottingham Forest, pairing him with Van Heck for Spurs, or Senesi maybe if you want to go there, looks like a really good pairing to take advantage of good fixtures non-stop every game week, especially for the first 5 or 6 games. I don't really care about Sunderland and Newcastle too much. Like I said, for Newcastle, you could have a fairly cheap starting striker in Wissa or Rosula, and Sunderland, while their opening 2 games are quite good, I'm not a huge fan of the Sunderland players because their data is quite bad. I mean, Brobby is cool, like he was finishing his big chances last season, and obviously Mukiel is ridiculous. Mukiel was 4 million last season, ended up scoring very highly. He's 5.5 million this season, which is quite a big price jump for a 4 million defender. Will he do as well this season? I don't think so. And is he worth the money? Well, maybe, but I doubt it. There's better defenders that cost around that same price point. We then have Arsenal, great entry point home to Coventry. That seems like a clean sheet locked already. Don't want to jinx it because I think I'm going to own 2 Arsenal defenders, but we will see. Saliba's out long term, I've already mentioned this, and Rice may miss game week 1, but missing game week 1 isn't the end of the world because it's home to Coventry. After that, their fixtures look quite average. Like I said, away to Aston Villa may not be as hard as it seems. It could be a great fixture, but normally Aston Villa are a bogey team anyway for Arsenal. I wouldn't expect them to do too well there anyway. It's mainly the fixtures that follow against those sort of mid teams, you know, the grey fixtures where Arsenal can just keep clean sheets fairly comfortably. Last season, what did they get? 20 clean sheets? That's very good, guys. You know, I know they're missing Saliba, but you get players like Gabriel in, even though he's 8 million, he's got so many avenues to points. Mosquera starting in the Arsenal defence while Saliba is injured for 5.5 million is also an absolute bargain. Then we have Spurs, not really any tough games in there, but once again, Spurs assets are weird because there's so much change going on and they did quite bad last season. I wouldn't really touch any Spurs players. Then we get to Everton and Leeds. This is where the fixtures start getting quite good. This is where you're like, yeah, I want to pick players from that team, not because their plays are good, but because their fixtures are good. And fixtures, in my opinion, are the most important thing about picking players. That's not to say you should look at a team with the best fixture run and pick a CDM from that team. It doesn't work like that. You still need to pick the right players. Looking at Everton and Leeds, they don't have standout players. Players like Wilson and Dewsbury Hall, you wouldn't own when Leeds and Everton are on a bad fixture run. But while the fixtures are good, they're 2 cheap midfielders that could bring a lot of value to your team, and their defence isn't so bad. Well, Everton defence is quite bad, but you get someone like Tarkowski, he could be quite good. You get someone like Bidgel from Leeds, he's also decent. So I don't mind picking players from these teams, especially if you want to save money, because a lot of their assets that could be good on a decent fixture run are quite cheap. We then get into the top 4. Brentford, having one of the best fixture runs in the league, screams Thiago to me. I think he's pretty good value at 8 million. It's fairly priced. He's not someone you'd own all season long, and we can't expect him to score 22 goals again this season because Brentford probably won't get another 10 penalties. But with a good fixture run, I do believe Thiago is a great player to target. They haven't been picked apart like a lot of other upper mid-table clubs, you know, like Brighton and Bournemouth, for example, and we've seen it happen to Aston Villa too, which makes me think they're going to maintain score strength or either improve it. So you could even pick a Brentford defender. It's not a bad idea. Just make sure you're picking the right one. Collins and Vandenberg looked quite good last season for Defcons, and they seem like a decent threat in the box, so those guys could be quite reliable to go for. I'm not sure how Brentford's window is going to look. I know they've signed Jaden Anthony from Burnley, who didn't do too bad in the Premier League last season. I don't know which defenders they've signed, but it'd be worth keeping an eye on because I feel like they'd be looking to strengthen their defence a little more this season. Then we get into the top 3. My drafts mainly consist of players from these teams, whether it's Haaland or not Haaland, whether it's Isak or Szoboszlai or Van Dijk or that new defender Jaquet, Bruno or Mbumo. These 3 teams are good teams and they have good fixtures. Looking at Liverpool, they play away to Newcastle, which generally speaking isn't great, but away to Newcastle is not as hard as it used to be. I think we can all agree, especially with their club being picked apart. And the games after away to Newcastle are all very good. I'm a huge fan of owning multiple Liverpool players in game week 1, despite me disliking the club itself as a Man United fan. After that, we have Man City. Now, if you have Haaland, it's a lot of money already invested in the guy, you know. You don't necessarily need to jump at the opportunity to bring in more City players, but owning Semenyo and O'Reilly is still a good idea because they're all really good players and Man City have a good long-term fixture run. Then at the top, we have Manchester United. Now, these guys are here mainly for the opening 3 games. They play 2 newly promoted teams in the first 2 game weeks, and while Everton away is a great fixture, we've seen the Everton numbers, we've seen the underlying data, they're not too strong. And it goes back to what I was saying earlier about potentially using a wildcard in game week 4, but you may not even need to. I'm thinking of owning 2 Man United players like Bruno and Mbumo. And if they don't perform well in the first 3 game weeks, I'm probably cooked and I have a lot of ground to make back up. But if they're doing well in the first few game weeks, I can even keep them through the tough fixtures because form can be carried into tougher games. Like I remember seeing it a couple seasons ago, Kluivert was quite an average player for Bournemouth. Then he played a couple easy fixtures, had some really big scores like big double-digit hauls. And I thought, well, his data was never good before. It's probably an opportunity you could have taken, but it's already gone. I've missed it, so I'm going to leave him. But he went into the tougher games over the next few weeks and still continued to score decently in FPL because he picked up some good form in the easy fixtures, got the confidence and carried it on into the future game weeks, which weren't so easy. Anyway, guys, that is it from me. If you made it this far, you are greatly appreciated, and I will see you all in the next video.